quite shocking to see the images from La Palma. We're not really used to seeing volcanoes erupt on Canary Islands, although I know it happens from time to time.
It happens from time to time, and the images are very dramatic, Eimear, but it isn't a big deal. Might be a surprise to listeners that while people have been evacuated, there are something like 7 roads closed. There's lava coming from 8 different points, but all the flights to the Canary Islands are travelling as normal today. And Palma, the airport on Palma is open. It just has 4 flights, but they're still going to and from. Air traffic control is working. There has been a suggestion that it should be closed by the authorities, but they've left it up to airlines whether they prefer to operate, and they are still operating.
Okay. Could you describe the island for us? Because obviously Irish people are very used to going to the Canaries, but maybe not as many people familiar with this particular island.
It's a huge holiday destination, but La Palma is not one of them. We do about 400,000, or we used to before COVID, do 400,000 people to the Canary Islands. They come in a little string. It's sort of a loose, like a belt, going from right to left, La Palma, then you've got Tenerife, then you've got Gran Canaria, then Fuerteventura, and on the extreme right-hand side, closest to Africa, Lanzarote. Most of the major inbound markets, the big destination they go to is Gran Canaria, but it's number 2 out of Ireland because we love Lanzarote. It's this particular love affair we have. If you were to take the number of people who go to Lanzarote in the last good year we had, 2019, it's more than the total go to Greece and Turkey together from Ireland. That's the extent of our love affair with the Canaries. We just adore it, and we go in summer when most markets avoid it because it's too hot. We do like going all through the year. There are entire towns, and listeners would be able to name their favourite bars and resorts. Sam Stevenson was responsible for one of the major developments in Puerto Rico, the Irish architect, and Irish. There are entire parts of the Canary Islands, particularly Lanzarote and Gran Canaria, which are so Irish that you can meet your neighbours as you're walking down the beachfront there in the peak during the year. Now, La Palma there are 4 big ones, the ones that everyone can name, but the reality is that La Palma is one of the others. There's about 11 smaller ones, and it's the biggest of the 11 smaller ones, but it's not that much smaller than Lanzarote. But remember, we've no direct flights there from Dublin. We have to the 4 big ones. And while Irish people sort of take a ferry off Tenerife to La Gomera, very few of them go to La Palma. It's not a place that shows up very much in our radar. It's quite unusual in that it's a little bit like Tenerife would be regarded as the quietest of the islands. It's a little bit like Tenerife would have been 20 or 30 years ago. A lot of nature, hiking, and one of the most beautiful walks was up the side of the Cumbre Vieja volcano, but that's the one that's just erupted, and that's been the one, as I say, the images are terrific, but there are no fatalities, and while the Spanish authorities have evacuated about 5,000 people and all the tourists have been got off the island, it's not being treated with the sort of drama that like we'd have seen in some of the other countries in recent weeks.
Okay, very interesting, and you describing it there and the hikes and everything on.
It's beautiful. It's truly beautiful. Yeah, absolutely.
Settles down. We've a few questions in for you about Australia. So we've so many family connections there. A lot of people ask us every week on the show, is there any sign of it opening up to visitors?
It's an interesting one because Alan Joyce is from Tala. He runs Qantas, and he's very, very determined that Australian international flights could be running by November. It does sound a tad optimistic, but he's the guy who's out there and he's the one who's watching it now. What they've done is they've pushed some of their schedules to February that were due to reopen. So what will happen when Australia reopens is there will be a major reconnection. Australia is not the biggest population in the world, but it's got one of the biggest cases of wanderlust in the world, as has New Zealand. Australians are stranded all over the world, a lot of them stranded in Ireland, and a lot of Irish people in Australia have no way of connecting. What we've seen since the start of COVID is that the Australians have put a cap on the number of people, the number of passengers that can go through the main airports. That's notwithstanding the very strict entry requirements. They've actually put a cap on the number of people coming through. That means that only people who are, buying business class tickets and have sort of elite athlete status to compete in the Australian Open, they're the only people who have been getting in and out. It's been horrendously expensive. What everyone in Ireland who is disconnected needs to happen is fares to start coming back down again to the levels they were in 2019, which is basically €1,000 return to Australia at its cheapest. It's going to be a long while before that happens because of that backlog, and I would expect it to be the summer of 2021 at least before we have affordable connections with Australia to reconnect with all our family out there and to get all the Australians home who have been stranded around the world. It's a complicated issue because Australia's politics is it's very adversarial. Like, there's a lot of name calling. It's like a bit like, not as bad as America during the Trump times, but we see politicians being barracked a lot about not being tough enough in international travel. So it makes it difficult for a political decision to be made to reopen, and that could delay things a little bit. We were back to those two dates: November for the first unrestricted travel, end of hotel quarantine. That's Alan Joyce's expectation, not mine. And February that we get schedules moving in the volume again. A lot of things need to go right for that. One of the things that needs to go right is Australia's own approach to COVID has to become a little bit more coherent, which mightn't happen. The second thing is that our own rates have to stabilise, and Ireland has the highest rates in the European Union, or second highest in the rates in the European Union in last Wednesday's figures after Slovenia, and we could end up with Australia reopening and Ireland not being brought into their green list or whatever they would, the Australian term for it will be quickly enough,
Okay, well, that's a big concern for listeners. It's been such a long time.
And families
reared at this stage, I'd say, and they're dying to visit.
Grandparents not seeing grandchildren. It's just horrific stuff, yeah.
I'm not sure if you're following the story as well, just from the Sunday papers yesterday. I noticed there are traffic controllers raising lots of concerns with the government, and I'm just wondering, we have had so much disruption. Could we see disruption in this sphere as well? They're alleging lots of problems with rostering issues and understaffing.
It's a union management issue. Air traffic controllers went on strike a few years ago. They got everything they wanted virtually immediately. And the reason is that there's many bodies that are in that semi-state. They're not exactly run by the government, but they are effectively owned by the government, and the profits go back to the government. There's not many of those bodies that is hugely profitable. Air traffic control is hugely profitable because we get fees from everybody that's flying across the North Atlantic. That obviously came to a halt in March of last year, but it's resumed to a great extent now, even though Ireland's flights are only back to about 40% of their levels. Transatlantic is coming back is strongly enough. And what the air traffic control unions are seeing is we're going to be back operating fully again soon. They make a very valid point that the system relies very heavily on overtime. But what they're looking for is a good, taking the opportunity, in between before the big storm of the return of international travel, that we need our structures put in place. And what they're basically looking for is better terms and conditions and more money. They're in a very strong position to get that because air traffic control is so profitable. And what we saw in the newspapers at the weekend was an initial rattling of the cage by the trade unions and the response of the IAA saying, these are not genuine concerns. you and I know, Eimear, and listeners will know what happens next. Everyone gets around the table. Everything is very confrontational and horrible, and they're all threatening to walk out and storm out of the meeting, and then everything gets agreed with about 4 minutes to go, and everybody goes off happy. I expect that to happen. No disruption to air traffic control. Just one of those wonderful choreographed industrial relations standoffs that the aviation industry seems to specialise in and glory in.
Okay, we'll watch this space. Any advice finally for people who are eager to book some international travel for next year, and they're always asking about how do I make sure it's COVID proof, etc. That's a tough question for you to answer, but at the same time, I think we have more of a sense now than we ever did of how things are going to be during the pandemic anyway.
Well, Europe's reopening has been very successful. There was all sorts of doomsayers and airsayers around July the 19th saying that this was going to be a bad idea and we were going to get explosions of infections related to international travel. That hasn't happened. International travel, of course, it's vulnerable to the charge that you can reseed. An imported case can reseed, but the level of infection from international travel was never high through 2020, and the reopening of July the 19th, 2021 has seen the countries that did most to reconnect keeping their rates more or less where they were now in the graph. Now, what is complicating the issue and making it more difficult to read is everybody's rates have come up, with the exception of countries like Poland, which is one of the most reconnected countries, 59 flights a week out of Ireland, for example. But the rates, infection rates, and this is important for listeners to remember, infection rates going up and down through this whole crisis have not been related to how connected in international travel countries have been. Germany, which is the one that did most to stay connected and has 10. We obsess a bit with our land border with Northern Ireland. It's got land borders with I think 10 countries. I'm not sure if you count Lithuania as a country outside of its soccer team, or Liechtenstein as a country outside of its soccer team, but they have a consistently low level of infection through all of this while staying connected. Ireland, which did most to disconnect of any country, is the second highest in Europe. So it's not related to international travel now. But do keep an eye on those international charts. If you see a country like Slovenia flying up the rates, it's not going to be a place that you choose. What will happen with prices and with flights is also hugely interesting. They were extremely low, historically low through the summer of 2021 or 2020. What will happen in 2021, Michael O'Leary is saying the number of flights will come down. It'll be about 80% of 2019 capacity. It reached 70% in 2020. So fares will drift up. I think it's unlikely. I think that by 2021 people will still need to be encouraged to fly. And what airlines do to encourage people to stimulate the market is drop really good fares into the market. They won't be as low as 2020, but by around February of March of 2021, we'll have a good picture of what the schedules will look like. We'll know more about the pattern of what COVID's been doing at that stage as well, and that's a good time to pounce. And I do expect to get really good prices for the airfares. Prices on the ground would probably float up because hoteliers would be looking to make back money they lost during the 18 months, and also the extra investment that was required.
So overall, I'm detecting if you were advising our listeners, you might say wait until March, February, maybe even see how things are, Eoghan, and we'll have a better idea then of fares and what the picture is like.
Pretty much, Eimear. And what happens is, you'd expect the lowest fares to be at the beginning of the cycle. They go into the system first, and then they rise slowly as all the seats are booked. What some of the airlines do is put pretty, not very high, but medium fares in early, because they know there are a lot of people who have a match or a first communion or a wedding or something. They need to be sure they're on the flight, and then sometimes the flights drift downwards. That's been happening certainly in the summer of 2020. Fares I looked at in mid-July for September were higher in mid-July than they were at the end of August. It's an inexact science. It's a very complex business, how the logarithms of the aviation industry work, but my educated guess would be that we will not see the lowest fares in the cycle till the run into St. Patrick's Day of next year. And as I said, to what you picked it up, wait, have a look, and watch for, things like routes being cancelled, which can be a bit of a crisis, or extra aircraft being put on routes, which sometimes happens when they're very popular.
Okay, Eoghan Corry, as always.
Always a pleasure, Eimear. Thank you.